Alright everybody, welcome to class for Thursday, and I knew y'all would be missing me since I'm not there with you today, so I figured the next best thing would be to give you a recording of me, because you know we're not going to get behind, we're going to keep on rolling through talking about expansion. Alright, you can see our objective today is one we've already picked up on with the admission of new states to the Union, where we talked about Indian removal. Alright, today we're talking about a new term called manifest destiny. Alright, this is the belief that God wanted America to expand across the continent and eventually beyond. If you look at that map there, you see all this pink was the original United States. This orange part, Florida, was added with the Adams-Onis Treaty. Louisiana purchased by Jefferson. Oregon Territory, which we'll talk about today. The Mexican Cession, which we're going to get to in the next couple of days. And Texas, which we're going to get to in the next couple of days. So you got to remember, all this, what we would call the American Southwest and the American Northwest, wasn't yet part of the country. This term comes from a newspaper editor named John O'Sullivan from 1845, but very important that you remember that term, manifest destiny, as being the belief that God wanted Americans to expand across the continent. I'm not going to stop too long on each of these portraits or pictures for right now because we're going to talk about these Friday in class individually, and we're going to go over that VTS strategy with each of these pictures. But first we got to talk about how the settlers get west. Well, it wasn't a very pleasant journey for anybody. You can see here I've got the Oregon Trail highlighted in red. I don't know if any of y'all played that Oregon Trail computer game when you're in elementary school. It might be before your time since it was my era. But people would travel from Independence, Missouri to Portland, Oregon, and this was not a very easy journey. People would run into things like cholera. They would run into hostile Native Americans. They would run into wild animals. If they got to a mountain pass and it was the wrong time of year, that could be issues because you could end up freezing to death. We'll talk a little bit tomorrow about a party called the Donner Party, where they actually had to start eating each other because they got frozen in the mountains in the winter. All right, but as Americans move west, that's one thing they have to think about. They have to think about the dangers that came up with moving west. All right, and as Americans moved west, they started to eye Texas. All right, Texas had fought a revolution in 1836. They fought their own war of independence to gain their independence from Mexico. But American settlers have been going back into Texas all the way back to the 1820s. The Tejanos and Americans had clashed. You see that word for the native Texans, Tejanos, over two big things: slavery and import duties. All right, remember, an import is something we're bringing into the country. So Americans didn't want to have to pay a tariff to send goods back to the United States. Also, most of the Americans who moved into Texas were from the South, and they brought the institution of slavery with them, which Mexico frowned upon. The leader of Mexico at this time was Santa Anna. Santa Anna Antonio de Lopez was his name. It's a name you need to stick with you. But the leaders of Texas in the Revolution, if you notice their last names here, Sam Houston and Stephen Austin, both have cities in Texas named after them today. Austin being the capital, and Houston, the big city right down there on the Gulf of Mexico. All right, Stephen Austin, though, does go on to establish one of the first colonies of American settlers in Texas. And I'm doing a very quick run through the Texas War for Independence here, but another key term you need to remember from this war is the Alamo. 187 Texans lost their lives when they were surrounded by over 4,000 Mexican troops at the Alamo. It was an old Spanish mission. It's an old Spanish church, basically, that they used to minister to Native Americans. It was where Texans hold up as a fort, though. We'll watch a little video clip tomorrow of an old 60s John Wayne movie about the Alamo. And this became a rallying cry for the rest of the Texas War for Independence. It was Remember the Alamo. And so I scroll down this slide, you got Davy Crockett there waving his hat with the Remember the Alamo tag over that slide. Several famous Americans lost their lives here. Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, the guy who invented the Bowie knife. I put this Goliad flag in there just because that's another place where there was a battle in Texas War for Independence, and I was good buddies with a guy from Texas in college, and he told me about how at Goliad, the outnumbered Texans were asked to surrender by the Mexican troops. They had one big cannon, and they said, surrender the cannon. The Texans' response was, come and get it. A big symbol of defiance. Alright, so after Texas gains its independence from Mexico, Americans start eyeing Texas, and Texans start showing interest in being added on to the United States, being annexed to the U.S. Alright, so a lot of Americans want to expand, a lot of Southerners really want to expand, and Texas wants to be a part of the Union, so it seems kind of like a no-brainer of let's just add Texas to the Union. They're their own independent country now, they want to come in. But it wasn't a no-brainer. It turned in several years of Congress into a fiery debate over the issue of slavery. Alright, but I include this slide here about the Webster-Ashburton Treaty to show that we didn't always work out our problems violently with other countries. You see here that I've got that this settled a boundary dispute between the U.S. and the British in Maine. And it also said that the U.S. would monitor a slave trade, but this is an example of, we just fixed that little tiny part of the map. This is northern part of Maine. An example of the United States settling some troublesome issues through diplomacy rather than fighting. You know, diplomacy means sitting down and talking things out. Alright, back to the Texas issue. Alright, Texas was such a hot topic because a lot of Southerners wanted to expand, and they wanted to expand to Texas, thinking that Texas would probably come to the Union as a slave state. And remember, I told you that there was always an uneasiness about keeping a balance between slave and free states in the Senate. Well, Northerners are obviously going to be opposed to this, so in the election of 1844, Texas is a huge issue. And I actually just learned a little bit more about this election this past week in an online class I'm taking about Abraham Lincoln. But there are three main candidates in this election where James K. Polk, who was a Democrat, he was an expansionist. He wanted to expand the country. He was a Southerner. He went to the University of North Carolina. Go Heels. Beat the Pirates next weekend, right? You can hold the comments till I get back, Anthony. Alright, the next one, who's a third-party candidate, is James Burney, who's a Liberty Party. And just from that term, liberty, we usually associate that word with freedom. You can assume they're going to be abolitionists. What really happens, though, is the Liberty Party doesn't win anywhere near a significant portion of the vote to win the presidency, but they do detract from the Whig votes, because a lot of people that would normally vote with the Whigs go with the Liberty Party. Alright, Henry Clay's the Whig candidate, and Henry Clay's the guy I told you ran for president 4 times and lost every one of them. He's the guy who had said, I'd rather be right than be president. So I've got here, he endorsed annexation. That means he was fine with annexing Texas. And Abraham Lincoln actually blamed a lot of these Liberty Party guys on costing the Whigs this election and giving it into the hands of the Democrats. Now, a lot of these Liberty Party guys, they couldn't see themselves voting for the Whigs just because Henry Clay from Kentucky was a slave owner. But in Lincoln's eyes, even though Lincoln was anti-slavery, he said at least the Whigs would not be as pro-expansionist and as pro-slavery as the Democrats would. Alright, so James K. Polk wins the election. It's a very close popular election, but a big electoral victory, and it's really the state of New York that election keyed on, and the Liberty Party in New York really cost the Whigs that state and cost the Whigs that election. Alright, part of James K. Polk's campaign slogan was 54-40 or fight. That means we were going to get Oregon up to the 54-40 parallel, or else we were going to fight the British. Now, if you can see this map and think of it in context of the larger United States map, this red line is the current U.S. border. Well, this green area was the entire U.S. British disputed area. So he promises we're going to get Oregon all the way up to here, or else we're going to fight. Well, obviously that didn't happen, because we ended up settling the treaty line right here, what the border is today. But it was part of that campaign promise to expand the United States. Alright, I can't go away from the only president that went to Carolina without showing a few more Carolina slides. That's the Old Well, which was originally the university's only source of water. Now it's just kind of a tradition that if you drink from that before the first day of class, you get a 4.0 at UNC. We'll talk more about Old Well and UNC tomorrow. But, I'll never turn back on the opportunity to praise Carolina. Alright, going back to the Texas issue. First off, I want you to look at Texas on this map. Notice it doesn't look anything like Texas today. As it goes all the way up into here into what we would call part of Oklahoma, Kansas, and all the way up into New Mexico and Colorado. But Congress sees Polk's election as a mandate for the annexation of Texas. A mandate means that the people are calling for it. Alright, but the big problems with Mexico are going to be, are we actually ready to try to add on Texas and in the process fight a war with the Mexican government? And I'm going to stop from this just so we can keep the videos short to load to YouTube quickly, and we will shift to another video.